Good afternoon, and welcome to the webinar Tips to Improve Color Consistency Through Proper Controlled Lighting, Certification, and Operator Acuity. This event, brought to you by Quality Magazine, is sponsored by X-Rite. I'm your moderator, Daryl Sealand, Editorial Director of Quality. Thanks for joining us. Today's presenter is Tim Mao, Global Customer Solutions Manager at X-Rite. Don't forget to submit your questions, and later in the program, our presenter will address as many as possible. Today's event is being recorded and archived on qualitymag.com. And now I'm excited to turn it over to today's presenter, Tim Mao.
Thank you, Daryl, and welcome everyone. In one moment as I share my screen and we will get started. Excited to talk to you today about improving color consistency and how we do that. So let's launch into it. Again, my name's Tim Mao, Global Customer Solutions Manager at X-Rite. Let's dive into our agenda for today. So we're really talking about visual assessment and topics specific to visual assessment. And to do that, we really need to start with, we're going to do a quick definition of color. We all have been looking at color our entire lives, but it's important for us to understand how color works because that has impact on how we do assessment. Then we're going to talk about why is visual king? Why does visual ultimately matter the most? We'll talk about controlled lighting and why does the light source really matter? We'll talk about certification and calibration of those lighting sources that are being used. Then we'll talk about operator acuity and how do I know that that operator sees color correctly, whatever that might mean for you. And then ultimately talk about standardized procedures for managing all this. So to start with, we're going to talk about defining color. So color is a three-part system. There's three things that have to happen for color to occur. First thing we need is a light. And whether that's a light bulb, the sun, the moon, or any other, a candle, any other source, right? All lights contain within them the various parts of color, the electromagnetic spectrum of visual wavelengths. They're all inside of a light. You probably saw that in school at some point when you, in science class, put light through a prism and you saw all the colors come out. So the light contains all the colors. But the light itself is not color because the light has to interact with an object. So while the light contains all the colors, the object is essentially a filter. And so in my stack of coffee cups here, the yellow cup looks yellow because it's filtering out the blue and the green and the red light, and it's not filtering out the yellow light. Likewise, the blue cup is filtering out the yellow light, but it's reflecting the blue light. So objects are filters and they're interacting with the light. After they've interacted with the light, they then are projecting or emitting the color that we see, and that involves us, the third part of the system, the observer, right? There's got to be somebody there looking at it for color to occur. So all three of these things together make up color, and they're important for us to consider because when we do visual assessment, any change to any of them can produce a different color. So let's look at that a little bit. But first, why is visual king? And I put king in quotes because that's kind of my take on it. It's really all our own fault. Each of us on this webinar, every person on the planet, right? Visual is king because you are going to make a purchase decision. So are you going to buy this car? You need to make a decision. Well, I'm not going to simply because of that door, whose color isn't right. So we are making that decision based on what we see, right? Something has to be pleasing for us to spend our money on it. Well, but then how much difference is okay? And is that difference on a car that I'm going to spend lots and lots of money on? My tolerance for difference, is it more tightly controlled than if I'm buying, let's say, a can of soup? I would say yes, but then I also realize that if you're walking through the aisle of the grocery store and you see all these cans, but one of them, the label is faded or a different color, our assumption is there's something wrong with the product when it's just the color of that label is a little different. But I think you get the point. It's why visual is king. It's what makes the purchase decision. And of course, everyone is trying to produce something that the customer wants to purchase. So visual really is really important. It's king. If that's true, then we go back to the way we know color is created. It starts with light, and so we've got to control the lighting. Color is dependent on light source. So I'm going to show you a few pictures here to help you see and understand that. So here's a photo, a lamp on a table, a chair, a pillow, the walls. Chair's kind of a beigey color, so are the walls. But this is what that all looks like if we've got warm white light in the room. This is the exact same photo, or I'm sorry, the exact same setup, simply with cool white lights instead of warm white. And then, nowadays you can go to your favorite hardware store or big box store and buy all kinds of things. You can buy what they call daylight lights. Well, again, the chair, which is rather beige colored under warm whites, actually now looking very, very neutral gray under daylight light. So the same objects are different colors under different lights. So obviously controlling what light source you use is very important. Secondary to that, we need to specify the light source and we need to be careful about it. Okay, so I'm going to show you several light sources. And what these graphs show is essentially how much of each color across the spectrum is inside that light. So this graph is actually a measurement of daylight. If we were to go measure it outside, it's got more blue light than others in it. The reason for that is related to the reason the sky is blue, right? So it has more blue energy. Now, if we contrast that to a fluorescent light tube or a fluorescent light bulb, you get these very strange peaks. Those are the various gases inside there fluorescing, right? Compare that to the old-fashioned incandescent light bulb, or if we were to actually measure a candle or a flame, it would look similar to this, right? It's a very smooth line, but it's extremely high in the red and yellow region. And then nowadays we've got LEDs, right? So this is a typical white LED light source and the kind of color that's inside of it. So you can imagine that which one of these I shine on an object is going to change its color because it's got different amounts of different colors within it. So you got to specify which one. So maybe we say, okay, we're going to use daylight. I want to use daylight because that's ultimately where the customer is going to see it. Great. Now we got to also be careful because not all sources are the same, even if the names are. So you can go get daylight, D65 daylight. Okay. We start with what the CIE, that's the international committee that essentially decides, approves, sanctions light sources, color calculations, and so forth for everyone across the globe. So CIE's definition of daylight D65 looks like that. Okay. I go to a light booth like the X-Rite SPLQC light booth. It has a filtered tungsten halogen light source to be equivalent or equate to daylight D65. But you can see it's not identical. It's pretty close, but it's not identical. Now, you can also go to a light booth like the Judge QC, smaller, lower cost light booth, right? It uses a custom wideband fluorescent light to simulate daylight D65. Obviously not the same curve. And if you go to your favorite big box store or whatever and go buy the commercially available daylight light bulbs, right? Fluorescent tubes or whatever to put in your office or your factory or whatever, they're going to look like that. So all of these are called D65, and we could say, well, yeah, it looks good under D65, but which one? Because you can see, for example, the amount of red energy in the commercially available one, significantly different than what you're getting over here. And so it's very, very important that you're consistent about using the same lights and the same sources. It's also important that we maintain those. So, you know, we've got to do things like preventative maintenance, having them regularly, annually certified and calibrated, right? So that we measure, document the lamp color temperature and how bright it is. So it's not just that color temperature we were talking about, but also how bright the light is, and even having it certified, right? And there are certifications that can be done to your light booths, ISO, several ISO certifications that are possible. And that's true whether you're using a light booth like this or this, which is actually called a harmony room. And what that is it's really this top piece of a light booth, right? The lighting part, not the box part, and a whole number of them hanging because the booth's not big enough to put the car in. So what you do is you build a harmony room that's filled with all these illuminants, right? To again have good, really good, controlled, certified, calibrated lights shining on an entire vehicle, for example. All right, so that's the light. We're going to jump over the object a minute and talk about operators. So operator acuity, and the question is, do we all see the same? And I couldn't help myself. I had to throw this picture in there, right? You all remember when this was the internet sensation of, is that dress blue and black or is it white and gold, right? It's one picture, but different people see it differently based on their physiology of their body and a number of other factors, right, will cause people to see that same thing differently. So the simple answer is no, we don't all see the same. What causes us to see differently? Well, it can be color blindness, which affects 1 in 13 males and 1 in 300 females. These are a couple of simple color blindness tests. I wouldn't call them valid tests being reproduced over the internet to say, you know, this determines whether you're colorblind or not, right? But if you have good color vision, you should see a number in each of these circles, right? 6 on the left, and on the right, you'll either see a 2 or an 8. Depends on how well this is being represented and how accurate and precise your color vision is. So color blindness is really a defect in someone's retina that causes them to see color differently. But beyond that, we really want to know about color discrimination. So if you're going to have people who are making go, no-go decisions on products based on visual assessment, it's really critical that you use something like this, the Farnsworth-Munsell 100 hue test. And the way this works is each of these trays, the little colored caps on either end are locked in place, and the rest of them are all removable. So one tray at a time in a light booth, these all get removed and mixed up, and then you need to visually sort them so that you get a nice gradation of color, like up here, from one end to the other. You have someone do that with each of these 4 trays, and then you can flip them over and they all have numbers on them, and there's a way to score how well somebody sees color. And I'm going to show you a couple of different results. So this is someone with very, very good color discrimination. When this little line in here jumps up here, it means they had these 3, they might have had 2 of them mixed up in the wrong order, and the same here and the same here. So this would be someone with really good color vision. There are people who can score 100, which means they don't get any of them wrong, right? They get it all right. There are also people who have poor color discrimination in certain areas. This is a test of a real person. So these lines way out here, this means that that particular thing, they might have had that off by 8 or 9 positions, right? So you look at this person and say, yeah, I don't want them judging color, or at the very least, I don't want them judging yellows and blues, right? Maybe they're okay doing greens because they got these all right, and they're okay doing the reds, right? But that person would not, you wouldn't want to trust their decision making here because their physical eyes and vision system don't allow that. This as well, using the FM100 hue test, going through this is recognized as a way to ISO certify someone as a good visual, having good visual acuity and being able to do proper assessment of colors. Okay, so then we're going to talk about standardized procedures, which is going to get us to talk a bit about the object. So first thing is you need to specify light source properly maintained, as we've already talked about. Secondly, you need a specified surround color, which is Munsell N7. That's the color the inside of this booth is painted, okay? Now, why is the color important? I'm going to switch over to a different item here a second. It's about this. It's called simultaneous contrast. So you see these two squares, the small squares in the middle, that look to be roughly the same color. But the reality is, if I put this one over here and put this one over there, now they don't look like they're the same color at all. This one looks extremely dark compared to that one. Okay? In fact, if I put them right next to each other, you'll see they aren't exactly the same color. But depending upon what surround I put around them, I can make them look fairly similar. So the colors that I'm judging, the small square, hasn't changed. The background has changed. That causes me to see color differently. That is why it is so important that you have a good neutral background. And the reason we talk about this Munsell N7 is sometimes people don't use a booth because, again, they have a harmony room, or maybe they hang two sets of lights in a room because they need to put larger samples in that are bigger than the booth. Then you want the room painted that color to not cause any issue in how you perceive color. It's important that you specify a viewing angle. So if the light is up here, let's say this is a booth and we're just not showing the walls, you want the sample laying flat and you're looking down at it at a 45-degree angle. Or you want to put the sample at a 45-degree angle. Okay? Those two will give you similar results. With a note, if you do the one on the right where the sample's at a 45-degree angle, the height of the operator starts to become a bigger issue. Right? So if I have someone who's 6'6" and someone who's 5'4", both standing in the same place looking at this, they're going to be seeing it at very different angles. You might think, well, that would be true here as well, but the difference here is I can simply get closer or further away, slightly closer, slightly further away to get to the same angle. Here I actually have to put a step stool in for the short person to get them to the same height as the other. So where the sample's located is really important. And of course, as we said, you need assessors with known color discrimination who have been tested yearly. So the specified light source, going back to color, we're taking care of the light. The surround color and the viewing angle, we're dealing with the object. And tested assessor, so we know what kind of color discrimination they have, we're dealing with the observer. And the reason you need to standardize a procedure to do all that is you want to avoid this. I'm going to show you one other cool kind of interactive thing here. So this is actually two photos overlaid on each other, and I can kind of slide back and forth as to which one we see, of two samples in a light booth. Right now they're under a light source called TL84. It's a fluorescent light source. And you can see they don't match perfectly. The one on the right is certainly darker. But as I slide this, I'm going to show you what those things look like if I put them under incandescent light. So first I'll just show you what happens to this one. So that kind of dark green color gets a little bit brownish looking. But look what happens to the one on the left. That's real. I have those samples. I use them live all the time. So this swatch is a brown under that light source and a green under that light source. Now, if these matched perfectly in this light source and then you go here and they don't, those are called metamers or metamerism. That's the thing you're trying to avoid, right? So not only is it a single light source that you need to check under, you probably need to look under more than one to check for this kind of thing. I can tell you why this is turning so brown. When they were working on this piece of fabric, they added a little bit of red dye to move it closer to this one. And of course, when I get into incandescent light, it's got all that red energy, and all of a sudden, all that red dye starts being excited, and we see a brown color instead of green. So that's what we're trying to avoid. We've gone through our list of topics here. And so we're going to switch over. Let me stop screen sharing for just a second. And before we go on to questions, we're going to put up a poll. So we would like for you to take a look at this and give us your response. Just to let us know, are you interested? Are there questions we haven't answered? Again, we're going to have a Q&A time here, but are there more specific things you want to get into? Are you interested in talking to someone specifically about a light booth, or questions about lighting, whether they're about the product or they're about the technical part of it? We've got the people ready to help and answer whatever questions you might have. So we'll give you another few seconds to ponder that, give us your feedback. All right, thank you all for responding. And I think we can move along. All right. We're going to move on to the Q&A portion.
So Tim, our first question comes from Renee. Says, we use an SP64. The light bulb has not been changed in about 10 years. Would that affect our colors?
All right, so we're talking about an instrument to measure things. It's possible, yes. I mean, light bulbs degrade, obviously, whether they're in light booths or they're in instruments. They will degrade. However, an instrument, when you calibrate it, so you're calibrating it to its white calibration plaque, it's essentially calibrating the fact that the bulb is going through a change. And there are detection things in there that will detect if the light gets to a point that it no longer is emitting enough light to be calibrated. That being said, if it's 10 years old, it's probably a good idea to have that thing come in for some maintenance, right? Preventative maintenance, certification of the device, and get the light checked out.
Indeed. Renee has a follow-up. What type of environment would be best to check colors?
Environment, okay. It's a good question. It's a big question, right? So light booths obviously are designed for, if we're doing visual inspection, right? They're designed specifically to eliminate outside sources, but you also don't want to set your light booth on a counter next to a window or something like that, right? As silly as that sounds, we've seen people do that. So, so there are some folks who will build a light room, right? They paint the room N7, they put the lighting in there, and it's literally got a door, so you're enclosing things, so you're eliminating any extraneous light coming in, so you're only seeing things under the light that you're trying to judge them under. But there are other environmental things to consider as well, right? Temperature and humidity, right? Those can affect the color of your sample. The sample will actually change color as temperature and humidity change. So you've got to have that as a consideration, as well as trying to control things as much as possible with the light.
Great. Next question comes from Patricia. They ask, how does surface texture affect color?
Surface texture affects color greatly, because if we think back to the color model, right, of light object observer, so the light is shining on the object. If the object is perfectly smooth, right, if it were a perfect mirror, whatever angle I'm shining the light at, the light will reflect at an opposite angle. As soon as I start to put some texture to that surface, it starts scattering its light more and more and more. That's why glossy things always look will look very dark, right? And matte or low gloss things tend to look a little lighter because there's more light being scattered around and so forth. So the same thing happens to something that's a given color, and if it's got more or less texture, we as humans are going to perceive that as a color difference. Tends to be in the lightness darkness range that texture has those impacts. But you've also got to be concerned about rotation, right? Because the texture, if you're looking at the sample in one rotation and you rotate it 90 degrees, you can get a very different visual response to that just because you've aligned the texture to the light to your eyes differently. So it's something to be concerned about, something to be specified if you're dealing with very textured things to help to try and control that variable.
Okay. Our next question is from Ryan. Any explanation to how different color families travel differently? And why is good travel for a metallic considered light to dark, 15 to 110?
Yeah. Different color families. Boy, that's a great question. I don't know that I have an answer to why color travel is more or less in different families necessarily. The travel question is talking about, like automotive coatings, metallics. Those are 15 to 110. Those are angles that multi-angle spectrophotometers, for example, will measure. And light to dark is it's all about making. The reality is the reason you want effect colors on a car is to accentuate the shape of the car, right? If it was something simple and flat, having it metallic wouldn't be all that interesting, but you're trying to accentuate the curves and the design of the car, and so having it flop or travel, as they say, from light to dark helps to accentuate that. And typically you want to go from it goes from light to dark because at those numbers, the 15, that means you're 15 degrees away from the gloss or where the light would be shining right back in your eye, right? Which would be pure white and blinding, right? So when you go to 15, you're pretty close at, so that's going to be very light. As you get further and further away, the numbers get higher and higher. You're going to get darker because you're getting further and further away from where the light, by its very nature and its gloss, is reflecting.
Okay. Egbert asks, can the observer be replaced by an instrument?
So an instrument can replace, I'm making air quotes, hopefully you can see that. An instrument can replace the light and the observer, right? And all we have to do is have the object, because the instrument's got a light inside of it. We can mathematically represent a light source, right? Different light sources. And we can shine a light on the sample and measure how much light is reflected. The reason that ultimately visual is king is that there are other things, as someone mentioned, texture, right? The question about texture. Instruments can measure textures or can measure the effect of texture, but of course our eye is seeing all these things simultaneously, if you will. So if you think about a piece of fabric that's got a weave on it or something, there's light areas and dark areas. An instrument, whatever spot size you're going to measure, it's going to measure all the color inside of that spot as one homogeneous color, while your eye can see the lights and the darks in it, and all of that has an impact, and your brain is computing and putting all of this together to what your visual assessment, what you're seeing visually. So that's why ultimately it comes down to vision being king. Instruments can be very, very good, right? They're great at being able to tell you, are you making it the same way all the time? Are you consistent? It's something we rely on, and we can get really good agreement with the eye. Roughly 98 to 99% of the time, we can say the instrument, if the instrument says it's good, my eye says it's good. And if it says it's bad, my eye says it's bad. But there's still that 1 to 2% area that we will always struggle because of the humanness of color.
Excellent. Well, that is just about all the time we have for questions today. So please join me in thanking Tim Mao for his presentation, as well as our sponsor, X-Rite. If you have any additional questions or comments, please don't hesitate to click the Email Us button on the console. Please visit qualitymag.com/webinars for the archive of this presentation, as well as information about our upcoming events. We appreciate your time and hope you found this webinar to be a valuable experience. Have a great day.